All right, welcome back to part three of our seminar on digital health and cybersecurity for parents. My name is Matt Johnston on behalf of Practive Security. I greatly appreciate you walking through this series with me. Thank you very much for your attention. As if you've made it this far, you know how much I value attention in these days, and I greatly appreciate you spending time with me to explore these topics, to learn more about online threats and issues, and hopefully to craft a better world for our kids as we guide them and shepherd them through the online journey that they're engaged in, or the digital world that they find themselves occupying in these times. So, to quickly recap before we dive into part three, this is the third part of a larger series. In part one, we kind of talked about the overall issues and problems that I think we are all well aware of in the digital health space, in cybersecurity, talking about online platforms, the smartphone itself, and the general impact that that's having on our youth, and what they're communicating to us, and what we can also perceive from their state of mental health, from their engagement in society, from their relationships, and all that we are seeing from our kids that are causing us to be concerned. So we talked through those issues early on. I introduced you to a few other topics around cybersecurity in particular that I think parents are generally overlooking or not paying enough attention to, probably because really the bigger issue is the mental health and wellness of their kids, which I fully understand. And in part two, we kind of took a deeper dive into those issues. We wanted to really understand and explore those topics foundationally, to really understand what is going on at a deeper level. We talked about some different people who I think are influencing parents, or influencing us towards understanding the right way to frame up and understand these issues at a deeper level, and are also casting a vision for the future, and what the way that things should be ordered properly, and the way that we should approach parenting overall in order to shepherd our kids in this digital age. And we set up some first principles. We talked through some core kind of just lines we need to draw in the sand to say, this is a foundational principle upon which we need to build. And so if you haven't had a chance to listen to those first two parts, I strongly recommend you do, just so you can kind of journey through with us up to this point, where now we're going to pivot away from that sort of strategic mindset, and we're going to focus now on tactical and practical things that you can do every day in your life. We are going to review all the topics again. We're going to do a little bit of replay, just mostly to summarize where we are, and to guide us into the specific recommendations that I have on a per topic basis. But that's what we're going to explore here in part three. So let's go ahead and dive into it. I'm going to go ahead and switch screens again so you can see the presentation full scale and not have to worry about looking at my mug. But let's go ahead and get into it. This is going to be the essential safety and security recommendations that we're going to provide to you by way of our recommendations, to really help you just understand what it is that you can do now that we understand the problems that we face in a more thorough scale. All right, so I want to first recapture my top concerns, Practive's top concerns. This is kind of a combination of the issues we talked about in part one of the series, but also it's kind of merging those different issues together now that we understand where they're coming from, what's causing the symptoms of the problems we're seeing in our youth today, and also joining in my list of other cybersecurity concerns that I think are falling off of our radar and aren't getting enough attention. So this is my reordering of what I think that we should be collectively most concerned about when it comes to the digital health of our kids, as well as the cybersecurity threats that are present to our kids now, and will be increasingly so in the future. So number one is the smartphone. This is something that we really need to understand and look at and figure out, how are we going to mitigate this portal into the digital world and the natural effect it is having in messing up the natural order of things and the natural hierarchy of value system, and get that device back in its proper context and used in the right way. Number two is exposure to harmful content. This is a much bigger issue that I think we tend to attribute only to social media, but of course the internet does have harmful content in a lot of other places that our kids can get access to. In fact, before social media, there was the same problem of exposure to harmful content and influence to radicalization and addiction that, of course, existed before social media. Social media has just made it much more prevalent and accelerated. But number two is just exposure that our kids can, or things that our kids can be exposed to on the internet that are harmful in nature. Number three is the platforms of influence. Yeah, we need to take a look at social media, and not just the big platforms, but there are also some smaller platforms out there. There are platforms that are designed as sort of safe versions of social media for kids, we need to take a look at all those and figure out, is this something that our kids really should be engaged in? And if not, what do we do about that? Number four, AI and what I'm calling the machine. Actually, that's a term that I'm borrowing from Paul Kingsnorth. He's an author who talks a lot about just the general state of culture and Western civilization that we're in, and how it is largely much like a machine that is driving a particular outcome. So we're going to talk about that a little bit between AI and the machine together as a collective topic. But that's another really big concern that I have. I think it is contributing to and exaggerating the mental health issues and the meaning crisis we have today, and it will carry us into the future if we're not very diligent about this. Number five, peer pressure and extortion. I'm sure you have all heard of this. I'm going to give you some examples, but there's a lot of extortion that's happening in the kind of cultural sphere of how our teens and young adults are engaging each other socially. There's a lot of pressure. There's things that kids are doing with image sharing and taking selfies that are, I'll say, intimate in nature, and sharing them with each other as part of the dating scene. And all of that can quickly become a source of extortion, forcing kids into all kinds of bad things and young adults into bad things. So we need to talk about that and put some gates and guards around that. Number six, predators and traffickers. Again, this one's not on the radar of most parents, seemingly so based on the national polling and surveys that have been done and that I've referenced in part one of the series. Predators and traffickers are generally not on people's radars. But again, social media, something like 80% of trafficking happens through social media. And so it's something we need to really be aware of. But it's not just social media. There are predators and traffickers operating at all levels of the internet, including within online games, including in online games that are designed for very young kids. And so we've got to have our radar up, make sure that we're aware of this issue. Point number seven here, privacy, identity, and the future. Another big issue that I think, again, is off of our radar, being very careful about teaching our kids what they share online related to their personal privacy and their personal identity. But also, this is a warning to us as parents. We are guardians of the stories of our kids. And as you've seen with cancel culture over the last decade or so, leaking or presenting information online that can be weaponized and used against us can certainly affect our access to society, to jobs, to culture. Well, not just now, but also into the future. So we need to think about that, how we are going to regard privacy and identity protections for our kids, and then also teach them those same values, because they're just sharing too much, and we probably are too as parents. And then we'll wrap it up with hackers, criminals, and fraud. Again, this is kind of a smaller issue for youth today. It's not a very impactful issue so far, but it is a looming threat, and it is potentially a very impactful threat if it does happen to your kids. But the age 20 and below demographic is the least impacted today by cybercrime. But the cyber criminals are definitely turning their attention towards the technology that is used primarily by the younger generations and younger adults. And so I think that that's going to shift here in the future. But also, we need to make sure that we're teaching our kids and training them now how to safeguard themselves against cyber threats, the traditional cyber threats, so that when they are adults and they are getting access to the resources that they are going to use online, they know how to do that in a safe and secure manner to protect all their stuff. So those are my top concerns that I wanted to present to you and say, this is where I think we need to focus our concerns and our energy as parents when we're talking about digital health and cybersecurity as a combined set of areas to address. All right, so some core strategies. These are some core strategies I want to throw out there that I think we need to adopt, we need to implement, think about how we're going to take these principles to address those core concerns. And I'm going to walk you through all of these in depth on a per topic basis here in a minute, but I just want to throw the core strategies out there to you up front so you know where I'm coming from, and then we'll dive into them. Number one, parents, we need to role model the right behaviors for our kids. They're looking to us, they're looking to adults. They should be. That's the role of adults in their lives, is to be role models, to be the representation of what it means to be a healthy adult. That's our responsibility, and that's our honor before our kids. And so we need to be role modeling the right behaviors. If we want our kids to be off social media, we need to make sure that we're role modeling how we contain that in our own life and model it appropriately. If we don't want our kids addicted to their smartphones, again, we got to role model that and make sure that our kids see that value system playing out in our life first, and then they will emulate it and see the value. Number two, we got to figure out how to get off the smartphone. I'm just going to throw that out there and say this has got to be one of our core strategies. Not necessarily for us as parents. We definitely need to curtail our use of the technology as adults, as parents. But for kids, we need to get them off. That's just one of those core strategies that I think is undeniable at this point. We need to find alternatives. I've got some ideas for you. There's some great solutions out there. We'll talk about that. But divesting off of the smartphone needs to be a core strategy. Again, that's the portal that they're using to enter the digital world. And that's the device that flattens everything out in that anti-hierarchy model that I mentioned Jonathan Pajot talks about. And we got to figure out how to break them away from that anti-hierarchy, that anti-order, that anti-value system technology, that gateway into the inverted world. Point three here, avoiding artificial intelligence. So again, going back to our part one of the series, we noted that something like 30% or more of teens today find their AI companions are better friends than their real world companions. And yet at the same time, the mass majority of teens out there are reporting that they feel isolated and detached and disengaged from reality. And so if they're turning towards artificial intelligence, it's only going to further their detachment and continue to mess up their ability to relate to others personally. So we're going to need to figure out how to get them off of that technology and help them avoid it altogether. And we'll talk about this. Number four, social media is for adults only. This is one of those lines in the sand. Again, we got to draw and just understand this. Social media in any form, and that includes apps that are designed for schools, for youth sports, for kids to use that are kind of social media light. I think we just need to recognize the dangers of the platform itself, of the way that they conduct the way that they grab our engagement and the way that they conduct things. We need to break away from that pattern and figure out how to get our kids away from that as an influence, as a place of influence altogether. If you remember, again, in part one, we talked about the pace of radicalization, how quickly it happens, and that the social media structure in itself is the ideal structure to accelerate radicalization. And so if we're going to safeguard the identity and the mental health and the value system of our kids, we need to break them away from that structure itself. Next one, capturing their attention and engaging in participation. This, of course, if we have an attention problem, if that's fundamentally what our issue is today, is there's platforms and technology and influences who are capturing our kids' attention and then keeping them addicted to that, then we need to figure out how to recapture their attention, to draw them out of that, to get them to participate in life in other healthy ways. And we'll talk about ideas for all of these. Don't worry, I'm not leaving you hanging. I've got some ideas, and all these we'll talk through. But this is going to be another crucial part of our core strategies. Controlling internet access and use. We need to take a very active role in this. And this is where maybe screen time controls do have a role to play, but we'll talk about some more strategies to make sure that we are controlling and guarding what access our kids have to the internet, and of course, what access the internet has to our kids. It works both ways as gatekeepers and guardians, as the shepherds who provide all things for our kids. Providing them access to the internet is also our responsibility. And so we need to do that in a very diligent way, or guard them from it completely if that's the decision you choose to make. Next, teaching internet safety skills to our kids. This is really, really important. No matter what, your kids are going to have access to the internet, probably, unless you're choosing the opt-out path altogether. Regardless, at some point in their life, some point soon, they're going to need to learn how to use the technology, use the internet in a safe and secure way that's healthy for them. And so we need to teach them all the essential skills that they're going to need in order to do that effectively. And finally, making sure that we are addressing the cybersecurity threats by securing access to our devices and our accounts, making sure our assets are not corruptible by outside influences, and make sure that the data that we share online, the data about our story and about ourselves and about our property, is safe and secure and cannot be tampered with, because that is another way that our kids are being influenced and coerced into other harmful activities. So those are the core strategies. If you want to capture this for a second, I'll pause, make sure you've got this, and then we'll move on. Of course, this is a digital version of the presentation, so you can always replay it and capture it. But we're going to go through all of these, so don't worry about that too much. We're going to repeat all these topics as we dive into them individually, starting with tackling the smartphone. We need to figure out how to restore purposes. So I'm going to borrow a lot here from the idea of from the church, from Christianity, the idea of the sacred, and the idea of identity and purpose. So if you think about identity and purpose for any object in life, every object has a value system that is that in a proper place in our overall hierarchy of value systems based on what it is, based on its purpose. Um, and we regard everything, and we appreciate and we respect and we leverage everything according to that purpose, right? One of the big challenges with the smartphone is it collapses all of that. It kind of destroys the hierarchy of identity and the hierarchy of value and the hierarchy of meaning, because it is one device, one central place that rules all things. Like, to borrow from J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, it is sort of one ring or one device to rule them all, right? With our single smartphone, we can access social media. It's a gateway into that social media space where we can live that alternate personality in that alternate world. It is a gateway to entertainment and potentially just and learning and other things. It is a tool for messaging and collaborating and reaching out to our friends and family and staying in touch with others. It is a place where we share content, whether this is individually through peer-to-peer messaging or through social media apps or just the internet in general. We can do gaming from the device. We can search the internet and do research, and all kinds of things are collapsed onto that one device, which has an effect of reducing the value and reducing the sacredness of all of these things, and distilling them down into the single window, the single view that you have, that single consolidation of all activity and all things through one device. It has two effects, I think, in general. One, it flattens all things because it's you access it through this one device, and so things have you kind of engage each of those things with the same level of attention. It's kind of a quick in, quick out, on demand, when you want to, when you don't want to, exchange based, I guess, like an exchange based engagement style way of being through that phone with all of these different things, rather than going to each of these topics according to its purpose and according to its value, and engaging it with the right level of attention and the right level of depth. When you collapse it all onto a phone, you can easily bounce between the different topics, quickly shuffle between them. And I think that overall has an effect on us in diminishing the value and kind of the sacredness of each of these things versus breaking them apart and engaging them each for what they actually are. The other thing that happens, besides the collapsing of the hierarchy and devaluation of all of these things, is the device then becomes, because it is a central portal to access and do all these things, it becomes elevated in our life in an unhealthy way. It sort of becomes the top of the pyramid of the hierarchy of values, if you will. It is the thing that we go to, that it becomes super important because it is the gateway to all the things of value in our life. If this list of 6 things on the screen, social media, entertainment, messaging, content sharing, gaming, and web browsing, if these are important activities of your life and they are all engaged through your smartphone, then that smartphone becomes super important in your life. And that again creates an interesting misalignment of value system, and our attention is placed in the wrong place. To borrow another analogy, think about the phone as our head. It is the thing that governs everything else below it, because it is the means by which we access everything else. And so this is part of the challenge of the technology itself, the medium of accessing all the other things. These are some of the challenges that just the smartphone itself presents to us. It is a technology of ease. It is a technology of efficiency. And with that, with ease and efficiency, you get diminished value on the individual potential of each of the things that we want to engage in. In addition to all of that, of course, we see this syndrome, so to speak, amongst all of our teens and kids that sit around in groups, in social groups of their peers, and they all stare at their phones. But it's not just teens; you see this amongst adults as well. I'm sure you've seen this. Happens all the time. Whenever I go out in public to a social space, a restaurant, or anywhere, you see groups of humans huddled together, all staring at their phones. It's because their gateway into the world, even engaging with each other, is through this device. And so it creates an inversion of reality, and we really need to tackle tackle that problem and restore the purpose and the value and the meaning of all the things that we engage in, to be purposeful and meaningful, and to give the right attention to them, each is due, each for what is due, excuse me. So I'll talk a little bit about one way that the one approach to addressing this problem. If you already have a smartphone and your kids already have a smartphone, one way that you can approach this is what I call the smartphone lockdown. Now, I've published a few articles on this topic, one for Apple for the iPhone, one for Android, and then a third for a software-based solution, focusing on the software solutions called Bark and Custodio. I've got their logos here for reference on the screen. I've done independent reviews of each of these to kind of look at this topic of smartphone lockdown based on each of the technologies and the approach, its pros and cons, its capabilities and weaknesses. But this is primarily when I hear from parents, especially in the homeschool community and in the school public school communities, the predominant proposal to helping manage the smartphone problem itself, the smartphone concern itself. The primary solution that's proposed is this first one, that you can leverage software, third-party software, or software built onto the device itself to manage the use of the device, to sort of build some barriers and guardrails around how the technology is being used, and to safely govern that, or attempt to safely govern it on behalf of your kids. And the things that these solutions, these software solutions, focus on are limiting screen time, location tracking to know where your kids are at all times. I think this is primarily a concern of parents who have kids who drive, or kids who are in public school. Number three, monitoring direct use messaging, excuse me, in social media. This is a big focus of Bark and Custodio, is being able to get visibility into the communications that are happening on the phone. Number four, blocking harmful websites and other online content or potentially apps. And then the last part that's really popular among the software-based solutions is getting activity reports from the device itself, so you know how your kid is actually leveraging their device. You can get some insights into what they're doing, how much time they're spending, who they're communicating with, what they're posting online. All of this to say there's a software-based approach to the smartphone solution, which is to try to govern how the device is being used to align with your value system. Now, again, I've done independent reviews of Bark and Custodio, which seem to be the top two proposed or recognized or identified solutions that are out there among parents. And they both have a lot of problems. I'm not going to bore you with the details right now, but both of them they're limited in scope and scale of what they can actually see. They're limited in scope and scale of what they can actually do. There are easy ways to bypass or to get around the controls of both Bark and Custodio, and your kid can uninstall them off their device without you being able to intervene in any way. And so by uninstalling it or disabling it, they can very easily get access to anything they want through their device, without you knowing. Now, both Bark and Custodio do communicate to parents when their kid's device is no longer being monitored. But I mean, as I go through the details in those reviews, that creates a window of opportunity. And as we know, TikTok can be addictive within 30 minutes of exposure to the feeds. Other kinds of harmful content, if your kid's away at school or away for the weekend or at some sort of camp, whatever, they can have potentially hours or potentially days of exposure to the public internet by simply uninstalling or disabling Bark or Custodio, which in my testing I found very, very easy to do, surprisingly easy to do. So there are definitely some advantages to those solutions. I can't say that they're bad necessarily. They are an approach that you can take to try to control and bring some limited use to kind of curtail back the use of the smartphone via those software solutions, but they're not great. And then to quickly touch on it, also Android is a platform I really struggle with. I can't really say anything positive about Android. It has a lot of problems, and so I generally recommend against that as a platform for anyone to use, but especially for kids. But there's no built-in software control solution you can get from Android. There is an app that Google offers, a software-based solution called the Family Link app. It is also extremely limited in functionality and controls and capabilities, and there's easy ways to bypass it as well. So I really can't recommend, if you're going to take the software solution route and try to control your child's use of their smartphone with oversight and with controls and with monitoring, I really can't recommend um, doing that if they have an Android-based device at all. But if they do have an Android-based device, use something like Barker Custodio. But even then, know that there's a lot of limitations. Now, if your kid has an Apple device, like an iOS-based device, Screen Time, the actual built-in Screen Time app and functionality from Apple, is actually really good. And I would strongly recommend it if you want to take this approach of limiting use of the technology. The best thing that Screen Time has going for it is you can actually disable functionality entirely on the device, and your kids can't tamper with it. They can't modify the controls in any way. Bark and Custodio, your kids can actually uninstall them. Android actually considers the age of, I think it's consent is what they call it. They actually have an age, and I believe it's 13 years old. It's really, really young, where once your kid reaches that age, they actually by default disable all parental controls and insights, because they believe that once your kid reaches that age, they are the equivalent of an adult and should have access to everything on the internet. This is one of the big problems with the Android based approach. But for Apple, they don't. The age is 18. The age of consent or whatever it's called is 18. And so as long as your kid is under 18, you have full administrative control over the device via the Screen Time functionality in the Apple ecosystem. And you can prevent them from even being able to install apps on the device. You can prevent them from being able to use the web browser. You can basically lock down all the functions and features and turn the iOS into kind of a dumb phone plus plus, and release controls and access to content in a very limited way. Now that also has limitations, but I think it's a better approach if you want to reduce the use of the smartphone and try to curtail it to a specific set of purposes. And then third, I want to touch on another approach to, again, reducing the influence and value of the iPhone in your life. And that's a technology called what the Wise phone, WISE phone, um, by Techless. Techless is the company, Wise phone is the product. But this is their attempt to also solve this problem. It is an Android based device. You buy from them. You can buy it from multiple places directly from TechWise. You can also buy it from Patriot Mobile, which is a Christian based mobile service provider. But the Wise phone is designed to, again, limit functionality and basically try to make the smartphone a dumb phone with some app functionality built in. So you can call people with the Wise phone, you can do messaging with the Wise phone, but you cannot access social media at all. There is no web browser. You cannot install a web browser, so you can't just do free-form surfing of the web. And then all of the apps that they support on the device, they are official apps from like banks and maps and other apps that we're used to using, productivity based apps. All the apps that you can install on the Wise phone are only based on their review and approval to make sure that the app aligns with their core value and what they're trying to do with the Wise phone, which is to break addiction from the device, break addiction from the internet, and break addiction from social media, but still give you some of the portability and the good functionality that you want from technology like a smartphone. So if I were to rank these solutions, if you're a parent thinking, well, I want my kid to have a smartphone, I want them to have some functionality, I can't just say no smartphone at all, then my recommendation would be to go with the Wise phone or an Apple iPhone, using the Screen Time functionality to lock down that iPhone to only what you absolutely need them to use. And again, I've got an article that's dedicated to this. You can check it out at our website or on our Substack page or on Spotify. It's called the iPhone Lockdown. That's a good option, but I think Wise phone is probably also a very good option, if not a better one, because it is a technology that is purpose built for helping us break away from the device altogether. Okay, now what I do want to warn you about is both the Bark, well, I should say not both, the Bark, the Custodio, the Android, and the iPhone solutions to content filtering, all of them, they tend to rely on internet content ratings that are published by the content author or by a third party. And they often use the standard TV/entertainment industry rating system. TVY, TV7, TVG, TVPG, TV14, et cetera, et cetera. There's an ever increasing list of these values. Um, uh, and so when you go to actually administer the controls on the device and configure what sorts of content, what types of content your kids can access through the device, a lot of times you'll be setting it based on these rating systems to say, for my kid, TVG is acceptable. Or some of them use the movie rating system, so they'll say PG or PG-13. Now, a word of warning about these content rating systems. They don't work. They're not an effective way to prevent your kids from being exposed to harmful content on the internet. Netflix, Disney, and Cartoon Network are great examples of why these rating systems fail. As we've seen in recent weeks, but even over the last several years, all three of these companies, Netflix, Disney, and Cartoon Network, they are publishing content designed for kids that's rated for kids that includes subject matter, language, words, characters, visual representations, etc., that are all cultural and political nuanced. They contain content that you probably would find offensive to your value system if you're trying to raise your kids in a moral home with a specific culture. There's a lot of kid focused programming that is actually harmful and is actually going to be working against you. And so I would just caution you and say you can't rely on these rating systems alone and say, well, my kid has an iPhone. I set the content access restrictions all to TVG, and so they should be fine. And I'm not going to supervise what they do with the device because the content rating should take care of it. You can't just configure it and forget, because those rating systems content will leak in. um, your kids will be exposed to things that you would probably find harmful for them from an ideological perspective or from a worldview influence perspective if you're just going to rely on those settings. So be warned, it's not effective by itself to use generalized media based ratings in order to control content. Now, what I would recommend, instead of trying to control the device, I recommend, again, going back to the path that we talked about in part two of the series of Jonathan Peugeot's introducing the idea of restoring identity and restoring purpose so that we can rebuild all of our life with the right hierarchy of values and the right level of attention given to the right things based on their purpose and their original identity. So I've broken this down into the four main categories of, I think, parents are concerned about, based largely on what Bark and Custodio, these software-based solutions, are trying to address. And based on the functionality of parental controls in iOS, there seems to be kind of four core categories of things that parents want to be able to control on the smartphone. And I'm proposing that, well, why don't we just take those off the smartphone and figure out a way to satisfy those same needs in our life without needing to use the platform itself, the technology itself? Let's find another way to do this. So the first use case is on-demand communication. Parents want to be able to contact, contact their kids wherever they are at a moment's notice for whatever reason, or vice versa, to make sure that their kids can contact them wherever they are, no matter what, so that they can get help if they need to. Well, there's more ways to solve for that problem than just giving them a smartphone. And I know that a lot of times we do this because we have an old phone on hand and it's free or easy to give away. But there are really cheap options that are available that can give you that same functionality without introducing the smartphone as a platform and all the trouble that comes with that we've been talking about. So dumb phones or loaner phones are a good option. Again, if you go to your cell phone provider and check, most of them today have dumb phone options. They have flip phones that have basic calling functionality and basic messaging functionality, and that's it. And they're really cheap. So if you want on-demand communication, think about that. Or as I mentioned before, the Wise phone or a truly locked down iPhone, where you use Screen Time app to control the functionality of the device itself and lock your kid out from everything except being able to use the calling app and the messaging app. And then you have basically a dumb phone based on a smartphone technology. But look for ways to satisfy that on-demand communication requirement or need for your family without giving them a fully functional smartphone. The next point is adult supervision. So when my wife and I send our kids off somewhere that where we are not present, we make sure that they are under the supervision of an adult. We make sure our kids know which adult to go to for help. And we know that those adults have access to smartphones or communication tools, and they can get in contact with us on a moment's notice, however they need to. And we equip and train our kids to tell them, if you're feeling uncomfortable in a situation and you need to reach out to us and we're not there, just go to this adult and say, I need to be able to call my parents. You don't have to give them a long story or embarrass yourself or tell them why. Just reach out to that adult whose care that you're under and say, I need to contact my parents. Now, if your kids are in a public school context, that's a little bit more tricky, but we should also train them that the adult structure that they're under, the authority structure that they're under, should be able to grant them access to their parents if they really need. So leverage that, lean into that, train the other adults in your community to be that for your kids. So your kids don't necessarily need to call you directly with their own technology, but they have an understanding that any adult who is the authority over them in that context has that responsibility and has that commitment to them that they will be a bridge to you at any place in time. And then finally, smartwatch. We're going to touch on this in just a minute. You might be surprised to hear this, but Garmin, who I consider a strong ally in the world of trying to divest purpose across technology technology. Garmin actually has smartwatches designed for kids that allow you to do voice calls from your watch to your parents and vice versa, as well as messaging, direct messaging, voice. It's voice to text messaging, and so that's another option. I'm going to drill into this in here in a minute to give you some previews, but that's another way that you can look for alternate technology that still serves that need for on-demand communication. Okay, the second point here, location tracking and directions. So I know that this is another top priority, physical safety of our kids and knowing where they are at any given time. Or if your kids are driving, I know sometimes we want them to have a smartphone so they can call up navigation apps and tools so that they can know where to go and have directions and all that stuff. I understand those use cases. Well, again, there's other ways to solve for that are cost effective, that don't require you to give your kid a smartphone. You can use again a GPS enabled smartwatch like what Garmin offers. They can do directions, they can do location tracking, they can send notifications to you where your kids are. Your kids can send a notification to you where they are. There's ways that you can do GPS enabled monitoring and location tracking without using the smartphone. And I think a watch is a great option for that. For driving, think about using a handheld or a dashboard based GPS technology. If you've got an older car that doesn't have in car navigation, think about just the Garmin dashboard or handheld based GPS solutions are relatively inexpensive. The older models are often on sale. It's a great solution again to get a purpose built technology that is for directions in your car without mixing it up with all the other things that are on your smartphone. Also, you can use SMS-based check-ins again from smartphone technology. Kids can just send a quick message to say, "Here's where I am," or you can do the same to them if they have a dumb phone. You can ask them, make sure you message me when you get there to check in. This is what we used to do when I was a kid back in the late 1900s when we were out with friends or at a friend's house. If I walked to a friend's house, my parents used to always tell me, call me when you get there to make sure I know you got there safe. And so that's what I would do. It was kind of just part of our standard process. Well, you can do the same thing with a dumb phone. If you want to know where your kid is, you can just tell them as soon as they get there, message me and tell me where you are. There's other ways that you can manage understanding and keeping pulse on where your kids are without, again, having to push them into the smartphone, which again has all those problems with hierarchy of values we're trying to break away from. Okay, now managing screen time and device use. So one of the ways that we do this in our home is we have times of the day when our kids are allowed to use technology. It is only on approval. So we've got a system set up in our home where the kids have to do certain things first. They have to make sure their chores are taken care of, their responsibilities are taken care of. No one needs help in the family for anything that they can provide help for. But there are set times and there are durations where technology use is allowed in our home. And it's only on approval. It is always supervised. It is time based. And when our kids are done with their technology use, whether it's gaming consoles or whatever else they're doing, they have to turn those devices back in. We have a place where we collect all the devices and keep them stored when they're not in use. And I think this is just a good practice that you should consider also is making sure that your kids don't have their technology for on-demand use all the time. Make sure that they're checking it in and out. And you control use of the technology. You control where the technology is, when they have access to it, where they have access to it, for how long. Like you can manage screen time without using controls on the device itself. And I don't use device-based screen time controls in my home. I control the screen time through our system of governing the way that we operate as a family. My wife and I partner in this. So this is another way that you can approach that screen time problem without having to, again, give them a piece of technology and then subscribe to some third-party software solution in order to do it. And then the other thing is, whenever our kids are using devices, this is a really important thing. We always make sure that they are in a public area of the house. They can't go off to their bedrooms. They can't go off and hide by themselves. They have to be in a place that they are exposed and visible to others. This is an accountability tool that we use. Make sure that um, they aren't hiding and trying to sneak and try to access things, even if they could. This is going to be a tendency of every kid, no matter what. The forbidden fruit is always going to be desired. And so our kids are going to try to find ways to get access to things. And so we make sure we govern that by making them use their devices only in a public space and on shared public devices. Like, now our kids don't have a dedicated piece of technology for each of them. We have only shared devices in our home. And that again is a tool of accountability. We can see what each of our kids is doing on their devices, and so can each other, right? So there's like eliminating the place to hide is kind of the core principle there. Okay, and then finally, under managing content, again, this is what the software-based solutions try to do. They try to say, we're going to let our kids have access to YouTube, but only on TV PG rating shows. Well, there's other ways that you can do that without, again, trying to go into the smartphone and administer all these controls. You can have purpose-based devices, right? We have our kids generally speaking, there's always exceptions to everything, right? Generally speaking, if we're going to watch content or media, we do it either on the TV or an iPad. Like that's it. We tend to not do streaming of any sort, whether it's YouTube or Disney Plus or anything like that, on individual devices. We keep it on a public screen so that everyone can see. But we also divide up our play across different purpose-built devices. Now, again, these lines get blurred a little bit because sometimes there is some games that are specific to a console or a device. But the principle here is divest the purpose. If you want to play video games, use a video game console. If you want to watch a movie, watch it on the TV. If you want to stream a video, stream it on the TV or on an iPad, a streaming device, right? So the point here is to take what's on the smartphone and divest it out to a purpose-built um, device or technology, because that also helps you with overall ordering of things in life and making sure that you, like, if you're going to watch a movie, there's things you got to do before that, right? You can't just sit down and start streaming. You have to prepare. You got to prepare the room. You got to make sure your chores are done. You got to set the tone and the context and the environment. You communicate that's what you're going to do. Same thing if you're going to play a video game. I'm going to play a video game. So if you don't want to watch my video game, leave the room, and you're going to turn the console on and engage in that play. There's different ways you can manage the content, right? By divesting the technology across different platforms based on the purpose and the intent of each of those platforms. Also, making sure that your web browser and web search activities are safe and secure with content filtering restrictions on those. And most importantly, participating with your kids in whatever they're doing online, whether it's through a smartphone or any technology, is always really important. And reviewing whatever it is that they've used the technology for after the fact, right? These are things that you can do without having to. Again, I'm trying to help you understand how you don't need to go down this road of locking down the smartphone, right? You can get out of the smartphone, do the same activities, spread them across different places of intent and purpose and meaning, recapture all of that purpose and intent and meaning and place and time and identity, uh, and still get to the same outcomes that I think that parents want to be able to get to by use of technology and doing these sorts of activities that are important to all of us. All right, so I do want to touch a little bit on, again, dive in a little bit on the Wise phone and Garmin and their smart watches, because I think these are really good options. If you take a look at the mission, so in part two, we talked about ideology, and we talked about building a community around you, a community of resources that are going to reinforce your value system and give you a sense of accountability and overall support. This is kind of part of the idea of building your arc. Is one of the core values we talked about in part two. So surrounding yourself with other people or organizations that agree with your value system and want to share that mission with you. So Wise Phone by Techless is one of those. This is just a screen capture from their website demonstrating the phone. It says, "We are on a mission to overcome digital addiction, build relationships, and embrace life to the fullest," which I think that's what we're after, right? That's what we're after in curing the attention crisis and the meaning crisis, is after these same things. So why not go to a tech provider who is sharing in that mission with you and incorporate them into your arc, bring them into your arc, Bring them into your community as a tool or a resource that you use to emphasize these values and to also implement them. The same with Garmin. You take a look at Garmin, these are two of their smartwatches designed specifically for kids. Look at how they market this technology. Let kids be kids. Save the smartphone, which means don't don't let them have a smartphone. Let them explore their world with Bounce Kids smartwatch. And the second one, Bounce 2, calling, text messaging, and real-time location tracking means the smartphone can wait. So these are just two different technology providers who are building solutions that align with this core value system that gets you functionality that you might need or might want for your family to have, but they're also trying to do so in a way that aligns with this value system of breaking away from addiction and the problems of addiction that are coming from the platform itself and also the content that is accessed via the platform. So look for technology providers and other ways to source solutions for your family and for your home that will help you align your value system with the outcome. All of this to say, like, you don't have to opt in. This is one of our other core values we talked about in part two. You don't just have to opt in with what everyone else is doing or what the culture is telling you to do or what's convenient or most efficient. Go through the motions of finding the right solutions because there are some great ones that are out there. Do some research or pay attention to what we're publishing from by Practice Security. This is why we're here, to help you guide you through finding the right and optimal solutions for your needs. All right, family entertainment. This is a great way to also set up a rhythm in your family that breaks kids off of trying to seek entertainment through their phone. Remember, in part one of the series, we talked about how 90% of kids use their smartphone to access entertainment, primarily through YouTube, but they're going through their smartphone in order to access fun things, videos, games, and whatever else they're doing through YouTube and through gaming consoles. Well, build that into your family routine, build that into your family story. Have different forms of family entertainment part of your normal course of life. Build movie night into your routine. Find movies or shows that are suitable for the entire family and orchestrate that as a fun event on a regular basis of your family. Make it part of your routine. So rather than the kids going to the devices to find entertaining things, grab their attention with entertaining things that are good and wholesome for them and orchestrate that as a normal and regular part of your family life. Same with gaming. You might think this is weird, but my family, we sit around and we game together. We play some old school games like old Nintendo Super Mario. We play some modern games. We I just right now we're playing a modern version of the Oregon Trail. It's actually really really fun. We play it through our Nintendo console, but we sit around the living room and one person is has the controller. It's a single person game, but we all watch and we all talk about what's going on in the game and we help each other out with making decisions as they're presented. But the same is true of Super Mario Brothers. When I sit down and play, my girls watch and we sit together and it's kind of a family event. And then when it's my turn's done, I hand off the console to the next kid and we circle around that way. We create gaming as a shared family experience. And this does a few things. One, it's a check against guarding from inappropriate games, right? If like my kids range in ages, of course, but we make sure that whatever we're doing together as a family is age appropriate for all of us. It's content appropriate for all of us, and that's a good way to build natural gates and barriers around what your kids are exposed to. That may be harmful for them because you're naturally curtailing it back to what's appropriate for the entire family. Kind of a side note, talking about Showtime and family gaming and this premise of making sure the content that you're exposing your kids to is suitable for all audiences. It's pretty difficult to justify PG-13 and rated R movies for kids when you think about it that way. When you're thinking it through the lens of what is appropriate thematically for my kid to be aware of, what sorts of images and themes and words are appropriate for my kids as a basis of entertainment. It's pretty hard, you'll find, I think, to justify PG-13 or R-rated content, even for yourself as an adult, when you really think about it. And so that is just a good and natural way to gate the exposure that kids have to potentially harmful content by governing it through a family experience and making it all about family. And then, of course, cards and board games is a great way, again, to get people off smartphones participating together and playing cards and board games. We do this with family gatherings. We do this as a family ourselves, but also when we have friends over. A lot of times the kids will gather and they'll play board games together. That's something that they can do as an activity because we just have a principle of no smartphones. When you gather together, No smartphones, no technology. Can't access technology. Of course, there's exceptions if they've got something interesting picture that they took or something that they created on a device and they want to show it with their friends. Like stop motion videos is something my kids love to make with technology and then show to their friends. So we'll make exceptions for that when friends come over to let them, play their stop motion video for 5 minutes. But we divest that. We get them off of the technology when they're gathered socially and get them to doing things like board games and card games. And so invest in that. It's not expensive. Board games are pretty cheap. You can invest quite a bit of money in creating that experience and fostering that as a regular experience in your home. The point here is, again, take the use cases that the kids are going to their smartphones for and expand them out and build purposeful time and purposeful constraints and purposeful participation and social gatherings. Like, incorporate all of those values into what your kids are doing as alternatives from getting to get them off of the technology. Also, with other things that that are participatory in nature, find other ways to get your kids engaged in things that are beneficial and helpful for them, whether it's music and arts to learn something new, sports and activities to get them outside and moving, or using technology in a productive way. My kids, again, they like to use technology to create movies, to create stop motion animation. There's a lot of creativity that can happen with technology. We just bind it to its purpose and say, okay, if you're going to make a video, use a camcorder. Don't use your smartphone. If you're going to make a small stop motion and you need software that is purposely built for the iPhone, then great. Use this particular iPhone to do your stop motion videos because it has that app pre-installed. We do that as well. But the point here is, if they want to use technology, find a purposeful activity for the technology and guard the use of the technology for that purpose. And all of this is all about restoring the identity and the value and the functionality of things that we engage in life in a hierarchy of values that aligns with our overall paradigm and story as parents. This is all a way to implement the first principles we talked about in part two, especially around shepherding our kids in this digital age. It's find other ways of participation, find other ways of facilitating the attention, find other ways to satisfy what you want the smartphone to be used for in your home, and get kids off the platform and engaged in all of life in more meaningful ways where their attention is fully invested in the activity that they're doing, and it is sacred. Right? So just touching on music and arts for a second, if the kids are interested in music and arts, my kids have to practice instruments. They each play an instrument, and that's a time and space that they dedicate to that purpose. And it's not mixed or blurred in with anything else, right? They want to go practice their instrument. There's posture associated with that. There's a place associated with that. There's tools that are associated with that. There's the instrument itself. And they have to go and engage in that activity, and it helps them be fully engaged in that activity in the right way. Music's kind of a weird example because you can't do that on a smartphone. But I think you see my point. It's embodying the overall experience for what it's worth is the right way to engage it and get the full benefits out of it, but also to make sure that you're incorporating it into your overall life in the right and appropriate way. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you about strategies for divesting off of the smartphone and finding other ways to serve the purposes and the needs and the reasons that our kids are going to the technology, serve them in more intentional ways throughout your life in an ecosystem that supports your values and also helps to support them. All right. Actually, before we get into artificial intelligence, we're going to take a break there. We're going to wrap up this segment of the seminar, leave it there with our top priorities, which is really about focusing on our core strategies, reviewing those, and focusing on the platform of core concern, which to me really is the smartphone, because it is that gateway into all these things that our kids are doing, both online and with their friends. So we're going to pause there. We're going to save artificial intelligence and much more for the next segment of our conversation. There's a lot to cover with AI, and there's a lot to cover with social media, which we'll get into also in the next segment, as well as some practical tips for securing your home and controlling internet access with different technology. We'll talk about impersonation attacks and extortion scams, online predators, and the ways that they traffic humans and target victims. We'll talk about traditional cybercrime threats as well, and much more in our next segment, which will probably be the last in this overall seminar. So again, I thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for spending all the time you have with me. I greatly appreciate it. I hope this has been helpful information, and we will dive into a lot more coming up in our next segment of this seminar. So, thank you very much. Be well, and I appreciate your time.